Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel for this Tuesday morning, afternoon or evening, crossover where you may be at. And today I've got a really interesting topic for you. I recently found a new podcast called the Men After God podcast. It came up on my homepage yesterday, and the video was from a year ago, but I just watched it last night and I absolutely loved it. I loved the topic, and it was about neurodivergency in Christianity. And as someone who believes in God and identifies as Christian and also identifies as neurodivergent and autistic, I thought I would do a reaction to it. I have actually contacted the podcast co-host, which is Dustin Alley, and his team, and I have got prior permission to do this reaction video today. They had a guest on, a lady called Amanda from the neurodivergentchristian.org website, who is also a autistic neurodivergent woman, and I'll link her contact details and the Men After God podcast down below in the video description. So I thought I would talk about what they discussed briefly as a neurodivergent myself, and then kind of give my thoughts as an autistic neurodivergent myself. So first we meet Amanda, who is a neurodivergent, talking to Pastor Dustin Alley, about being what does neurodivergent mean, being a Christian within the kingdom of Christ. And Pastor Dustin starts talking about his potential ADHD assessment. So that's where I'm going to first start off. So as for me, as a neurodivergent autistic woman, I was late diagnosed. I also identify with his guest Amanda, who is also a late diagnosed woman, late on in her life, and going through the process of being a autistic or potentially ADHD person. It's very, very complicated and stressful and confusing time, because going through the process of not knowing why you're different, why you speak different, why you act different, why you see the world in a different way from everybody else that is around you, who lives with you, who cares for you, who is friends with you, who works with you. It can be really frustrating not to know why, what the reason is behind that behaviour or our own quirky, unique personality. So I identify with Pastor Dustin saying, he's going through the process himself and having to identify things with himself, and he's having to find out through other church members and family people that he's talked to, who he said about an example about a lady came around to his house and had a discussion about how, he is obviously neurodivergent, and it was really interesting to see him actually open up on that discussion. So then we clearly go next into the guest Amanda talking about her late diagnosis, and she goes on to explain she didn't know that she was autistic or supposedly neurodivergent until 2017-18. So again, I want to pause there quickly, because this is something that I've struggled with. This is something that I went through myself as a late neurodivergent autistic person at the time who didn't know she was neurodivergent or autistic. And I was diagnosed back in 2014, which is now 13 years ago, which sounds a long time ago, but it still feels like yesterday to me. And going through the late diagnosis, I can totally relate with Amanda, having to deal with all the challenging kind of anxieties, behaviours, overstimulation, like not knowing how to say it or explain it to people. Also having to find out more online about what the condition is, how it presents its own behaviours, its traits, and how we can best identify and support ourselves and other people who live with us, whether it's our other half, our spouse, our mum, our dad, our children, friends that we associate with. I really understand where she's come from with that, because it's something that I've struggled with. I still struggle with to this day. That, I struggle to sometimes comprehend what my autism actually is and what it actually means to me. But, I've luckily had a really supportive family who have identified it. And at the time when I was first being assessed, I was very, very angry and bitter about it. I was very upset the way that I found out about myself. I was very, very angry with my family because there were some things that were done that I found very disrespectful, and things that were highlighted in books and bits of paper with my name on them, which I found really distressful and really rude, and it really hurt me. So at first I wasn't too sure about going forward with the assessment or even accepting the diagnosis at the time. But as time went on, I researched it more, I looked into it more, and I basically wasn't really given much of a choice. And I then had to get to the mindset of, right, I'm getting assessed whether I want to or not. And, my Aunt Dawn, my mum, people who were looking into it, my dad, and at the time his girlfriend, and they'd obviously been talking and discussing it. And I happened to find out via text that's been on the floor at my dad's previous girlfriend's property, and there was my name highlighted in several textbooks. And so then I started kind of okay, maybe I'll look into it. And as time went on, as the diagnosis and assessment got nearer to being more of a reality, I started researching it and kind of come to terms with it and accepting it. Then once I went through the assessment back in the summer of 2013, it was a very emotional time. I was going for 2-hour sessions every couple of months, and it was questions about my childhood, my upbringing, my schooling, my early jobs that I had, my friendship circles, my mental health state of mind at the time, which wasn't great. I was having really bad emotional and anxiety issues, feeling really down, withdrawing from society, struggling to communicate, sleeping till quite late on in the morning, then getting up and having to be told, to shower, and etc, etc, etc. And then I started turning it into kind of my superpower, I guess you want to put it that way. So I would totally relate to her about that. And then we go on to the function labels. This is something that really, really winds me out of the passion, because the function labels, I know we have to have them for medical diagnosis assessment. I understand that. I'm not saying that we don't have to have them, but the high functioning, low functioning, severe functioning labels comes from the American Psychological Association, which is also part of the DSM criteria. So that's where you get the high functioning, low functioning, severe functioning labels. I personally don't like the labels. I think they are very biased towards certain groups of people. I think, obviously, like Amanda was saying, she was diagnosed as the high functioning person, and again, I relate to her because I was also diagnosed as the high functioning person. And it's really not relevant or right, that label, because the diagnostic criteria for women are a lot different from what it looks like for men, boys, in general. And for me to be diagnosed as the high functioning person, it basically, like Amanda says, invalidates our struggles, invalidates who we are as people. You don't get as much help and support and guidance as if you are someone with the low functioning or limited functioning label. So I totally agree with her on that side of things. I think it's something that we don't really still understand to this day. I think it's something that we all need to support people with, especially going through the assessment and diagnosis process. Also, then she goes on to talk about sensory issues. Absolutely. This is something that I feel people don't really know much about, because sensory issues are a part of the autism, ADHD, neurodiversity spectrum as a whole. I think we should be very careful with limiting it only to 2-3 certain conditions. Neurodivergency is a spectrum, so like Amanda did mention, autism, ADHD, ADD, OCD, among that line of the neurodivergent spectrum, we all have some kind of sensory issue, sensory impairment that identifies us as being on that spectrum of things. And for me, I'm very heightened to noise is one of my main triggers. Crowds, lights are again my triggers. I find it very difficult when she actually then said about that it can come as something that's not recognised. And then she said also that the autism spectrum presents itself in different ways. Absolutely, again, the difference between women and men are very much different when it comes to autism, ADHD, ADD, OCD, because women tend to mask more their struggles than men do. It's a lot more obvious within men and boys autism, ADHD, OCD, because it's physical things that you do, physical things that you say, gives it away, whereas women, we tend to mask and chameleon ourselves. We tend to hide and push it down because we don't want anyone to see that we're different. We want to be normal, and sorry, but normal just doesn't exist. That is the way that is. Then I want to go on to, then she says sensory processing time. Yes, oh my god, I'm so glad she mentioned this. Sensory processing time when you're in a conversation with somebody and you're talking and you're listening and you're paying attention and you're constantly having to focus on that person in that discussion with you, and you're having to give the best eye contact, the best facial looking at you, because you want to be seen as actively listening, actively joining in with the conversation. And it can be really, really daunting, overwhelming, overstimulating, really anxiety provoking when you are somebody who's on the autism spectrum, ADHD spectrum, ADD spectrum, OCD spectrum, or otherwise. It really does drain the physical and mental effort out of me a lot of the time. And then next she talks about auditory processing and the change to the unpredictable. So auditory processing, again, for me, is part of being on the spectrum. I have sensory processing issues, so whether that's sensory processing with noise or with crowds, or being around large groups of people, and then I have to process where I'm at, where I'm sitting, how much space there is between me and the other people. It's all to do with where my body is in sensory and in time. So again, I have to be very sensory aware of how much distance to give myself between me and the other person, and the personal boundaries of not to cross it. So again, I do understand that as well. A lot of us have delayed auditory processing time. So again, it's about giving us the time, the right tools to let us think about what's being said, and then give us time to respond to the conversation, so we don't appear as rude or blunt or disrespectful, or like we're not interested, because we actually are really, really interested. We do actually want to be part of the discussion, and we do actually want to help you to understand and interact with us and become friends. And it's just that our brains are slowly going over the information to go, right, they said that, I say this. They said that, I say this. And it's how the brain connects to the mouth, and mouth connects to the brain, of how to physically process that. So then I want to go on to what she mentioned about ADHD and autism. So autism and ADHD are often comorbid. They're often put together as one diagnosis, and actually sometimes it's not right, because sometimes, again, autism can be diagnosed on its own, or then it can be diagnosed as being, you're ADHD. So basically it means that both the person has the autism spectrum as well as the ADHD spectrum, and you basically have both diagnoses thrown at you. But again, it's not all autistic people or not all ADHD people will have either. So it depends whether you're diagnosed with one or whether you're found to be having both, and then you're called ADHD, because the AU is for the autism and the AUD is HD is for the ADHD side of things. So again, that is a very common thing. Then they talked about the clinical model and the function labels again, which I mentioned a little bit ago. Yes, and then they talked about stigma. Stigma is something that, unfortunately, I feel hasn't really improved as much. I feel stigma is still very much around. It's still very much something that everyday people struggle with understanding what the autism or ADHD spectrum is. And when people hear the word autism or Aspie, or they hear the word spectrum or autism or autistic or ADHD, or they hear ADHD or ADHD spectrum, or they tend to think that either you're a child, or things that have been said about me, or things that have been said to me, you can't be autistic, you function too well, are you sure you're not a spoiled brat? Like, things like that need to change, because again, it's the stigma that gets put into not just the Christian community, not just the church environment, it's within community as a whole. It's something that gets often separated, and then devised and used as a way to make people with autism or ADHD feel small and silenced. Again, that stigma comes from media, TV, radio. It comes from people in the community who hear little things will think, I know what autism is. I know what ADHD is. In actual fact, they don't. And they just make a judgment call and go, well, they act a bit odd, and they say things a bit weird, like, I don't know, there's something not on about them. They can't put their finger on it. They just think, so that's that bit. And then they talked about compensating and masking. I'm so glad Amanda and Dustin both brought this section up, because compensating and masking doesn't really get much talked about. It's being talked about more in neurodivergent and autism circles now, and ADHD circles now, because there is more physical awareness on it, there is more acceptance on it, there is more understanding on it. But again, within the church community, within the church itself, I don't think there is as much help, support available as what there should be for being in 2025 going into 2026. I think it's something that we as a Christian community, as a Christian kingdom, as followers of the body, we have to be more supportive and understanding on ourselves. We have to be supporting one another who may be identifying as neurodivergent, who are diagnosed as fully neurodivergent. Again, it's about accepting each person for who they are, with their talents, their abilities, their gifts, their callings. It's about lessening that stigma and helping them access the church environment, the church network, the church body as a whole. So, that's that. And then they go into more about masking. So, again, for someone like me who used to attend church, I masked heavily. And I mean heavily. Like, I didn't tell many people that I had autism or was autistic until it got to a point where it was made obvious. And I had to explain to my pastor, reverend, that I was finding things a little bit difficult, and that there just needs to be some slight changes in communication and how I saw the world, feel the world, because the church became really hard for me to attend at that point. I'd also been very, very poorly as well, due to my health taking a bit of a nosedive, but there we go. And I found the church's response was not brilliant. I was treated like I was stupid, and like it was a excuse to get away from being in church, and it really, really wasn't. The fact that I was really struggling with my autism at the time, I was really struggling to be around people, I was really struggling to accept who I was, and I found that for them to not include me or to even identify about it just made it that much worse to communicate with. So, yeah. And the fact that we tend to mask our struggles, again, I masked until I physically couldn't mask anymore. And then they go on to talk about eye contact. Thank God, this is another important topic I want to stress to you guys. Eye contact should not be a stigmatized thing. If you can't do eye contact, or you can only do limited eye contact, you need to be able to at least show that you're listening by smiling, and again, that's a stigmatized thing, but again, I do it usually by sort of nodding and like looking like to the person's face, or I may look to the nose or to the mouth to lip read to show that I'm still actively in the discussion and wanting to talk to you and want to be involved with you in the discussion. Eye contact is also something that I feel is too forced. So if I can't look at you, or my brain won't physically let me look at you, I'm still listening. Like, I can still put my ear to you, or I can still look towards you and be like, I'm still listening, I'm still nodding, I'm still affectionately talking with you, just because I'm not directly looking at you one-on-one like that, I shouldn't be expected to look at you. I shouldn't be expected to be actively constantly staring at you, because for me it's very, very uncomfortable. Like Amanda said in her section of it, it's very physically uncomfortable for us. Eye contact is something that we can't do. It's just very invasive. It feels like we're being invaded our own personal space. We feel that we're invading your personal boundary, and that is really intimidating for us, because again, we don't want to get in trouble or cross that professional boundary or personal space of your spatial awareness. So again, that is something that I really do struggle with that. I think the church in general needs to be more accompanying and understanding that it's not that we're being rude or challenging or distractive. We are actually trying to interact with you and communicate with you. It's just that our brains physically won't allow us to do the eye contact because we just find it too overwhelming with the situation. And then they talked about dyspraxia and other conditions. So let me mention a brief bit about that for my own personal self. I am someone that identifies as being dyspraxic. I'm pretty sure I was diagnosed with something similar when I was younger. I am very, 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 very clumsy, and I know dyspraxia is about coordination, communication. I will literally fall over and bruise myself anyway. I have bruises on my arms, on my legs. I am very naturally clumsy. I don't know if it's my spatial awareness, or if I just don't see things, or if it's something that my body doesn't see things, or, I just can't mentally process it. There's a door there, or there's a mat on the floor there, or there's something in my way, and I just go whoop, and I trip and I bang myself. So again, I am very clumsy, and I struggle with my coordination as well. So again, if that's things like putting on shoes or zipping up my coat or something so simple as that, it can be really quite a sensory thing for me, because I have to think, right, Gemma, put on your shoes, do up your coat, wrap your scarf around you. I have to make sure that everything is done in a certain order, and if I don't do that, it really alters my sensory state. So then they talked about how to invite neurodiversity into the kingdom of Christ. So again, I do agree with this 100%. I think as a neurodivergent autistic person, we do have to invite the neurodiversity spectrum into the church kingdom. I think we do have to do a lot more research about inclusion and possibly training and how to interact with neurodivergent, whether it's young people, adults, children, youth. We have to learn to be more inclusive, and we have to learn to be more appreciative and respectful, and learning to understand and offering a helping hand. And I think the church does a lot better than what it has done in the past, but I think as a church kingdom, as a church network, a church body, we do need to get a lot more better at around the neurodiversity spectrum as a whole. And then they finish with accepting people for who they are. So again, I 100% agree with this. I think it's fantastic that this topic was talked about. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments section, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye.